everyone. This is William del Pilar, your conservative Latino, and I'm here with my big, girthy...
Big John. That's me.
I catch you off guard.
I hate it when you do that because I feel like Big Girthy John is actually a porn star's name. And every time you say that, I almost feel like taking off my pants or something to introduce myself to the ladies, of course.
Well, I'll be honest. The sad thing about the military that they don't tell us that is sad, probably reputation-wise, is we are some seedy, sordid people. We have seen it and we have experienced it. I always tell people, you want your son to gain some serious experience, send them to the military.
Serious experience, yeah.
So, John, we got a great show today.
Yes.
As we know, the NFL draft is coming up. It's always... I remember the NFL draft when I first covered it with KFFL. It is nothing like it was today. Nothing. Everything from the Senior Bowl, the Combine, the NFL draft. Now they're just major events. And it was great for viewership and traffic for KFFL. Believe it or not, we were famous for our player news and our fantasy content. Our most trafficked time of the season, of the year, was always the draft because it brought the fantasy people together, the gamblers, the average fan, the big wig. It brought everybody together. So I'm really looking forward to the show. I'm looking forward to our guest, and I'll let you take it away.
Sure. I'd be happy to introduce our guest. William, every so often we have the opportunity to bring back some guys, a blast from the Sports Grumblings past. And this next guest I'm about to introduce, one of my favorite writers of all time at Sports Grumblings. Let's bring him on. He is currently with the Action Network. He's also with NBC Sports Edge, where he focuses mainly on college basketball and college football. He's written for several outlets, most of the famous ones. I mean, you could say Sports Illustrated, Roto Grinders. He's written for newspapers. He just had an article in the New York Post printed the other day. And of course, the most important credential one can have on this planet, an OG Sports Grumblings featured columnist, where for years he used to write the fire sale. And I'm not kidding you. It is a crime to this day that the fire sale never got an FSWA award for best column. I lobbied for that every year. The guy, I love this guy. He's the only other writer, William. I don't even read your stuff, but I always made it a point to read this guy's stuff. Mr. Tom Casale. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. I was around back. I was with you so long. It used to be called Gridiron Grumblings.
That's right.
When it first, a long time ago. Back
in the day, and I remember when he used to send me articles saying, "Could you print this? Take a look, take a shot with me." Yeah. And
thank you for work.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention Tom. Actually, when he did finally graduate from Sports Grumblings, I mean, one of the places he landed, which was amazing to me, was you actually hooked up with the New England Patriots. You were like a beat writer. You covered the team from the inside, right? So you've got Belichick's stories, Brady's stories. I remember you were the first guy who picked up the phone and called me one time. You said, "John, this Matt Castle, when he leaves New England, he's not going to amount to anything. He's a nice guy, but he's not going to amount to anything." And sure enough, as soon as the Chiefs signed him, we were talking about it last episode, Tom, guy got flushed down the toilet when he left New England.
I mean, we used to call him pick six in practice. I mean, he's the worst. I'll be honest with you. He far exceeded my expectations. Matt Castle's the worst practice player I've ever seen, but he actually played better in games. So credit to him for that.
Let's ask you this quick question then. Why is it that it seems that every Patriots backup goes on to get a starting gig? Somebody's always willing to trade draft capital to get a Patriots backup. What's the mystique around that, Tom?
Well, the thing about the Patriots is they're so well coached. I tell a story all the time. I used to cover, obviously, Patriots training camps, right?
Right.
And Belichick goes over every possible scenario that can happen in a game. Then I went to Jets training camp when Rex Ryan was the coach. And every time someone fumbled, he had everybody, including interns, doing push-ups. And I look over and where Eric Decker and Chris Johnson and all the veterans were riding the stationary bikes, pretending they were injured, laughing.
Right.
Because
Wow.
that crap doesn't work in the NFL. Get down and do your push-ups, and same thing with Joe Judge. That stuff plays well with fans, but your veteran players aren't going to buy into it. So I think guys like Belichick and Tomlin, who just teach and are going over everything, they get players prepared to play when they need to play. So when you're in New England and you're there for a short time as maybe a backup quarterback, you might look better than you're gonna through a 16-game season.
Right.
Tom,
I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to say, to your point, look what happened to Urban Meyer, like one of the greatest college coaches. One season in Jacksonville, and man, what a dumpster fire in Jacksonville with Urban Meyer, right, Tom?
Yeah, well, I think, and I didn't know it was going to go that bad, but I didn't think that would work for this simple reason. College coaches have the best jobs on earth. They run the entire city or town that they're in, right? So they're used to controlling everything around them. I remember when I worked for the Patriots, that's when Nick Saban was in Miami. After the second time we played him, I walked in the bus and I said, he's done. He's going back to college. He looked miserable, absolutely miserable.
Yeah, you're right. He did.
Yeah.
Like those press conferences, he looked like
Miserable.
he didn't want to be there. But you bring up a good point, Tom. I know in military special forces training, they run you like a boot camp to weed it out and to get you to a certain point. But after that, you're a man. There's no A to Z, meaning we go A, B, C, trying to make you better. It's from A, here's where you are. Z, you screwed up. You're out of here, or whatever. It's just that mentality. But I do have a question regarding that, because we were talking about the Patriots last night and Josh McDaniels. And there was doing some research on it. I found quite a few articles that kept talking about McDaniels and kind of making him out to be a ghost whisperer, including Brady making a comment about McDaniels going to Las Vegas. I was going to say Oakland, going to Las Vegas and being a huge boon for Derek Carr over there. What's your take on that? Do you validate that? Do you question that? A little in the middle, based on when you were there?
Yeah, listen, I know people have a tremendous respect for Josh McDaniels, and I think it's something that Champ Bailey said after McDaniels' time in Denver. He said he's probably the smartest coach he's ever been around. His mistake is he came in trying to be Bill Belichick, and you can't be Bill Belichick without the ring. So he said he lost the veterans in the locker room because he was trying to play that kind of role. I think he's learned from that. I think now he's just going to be Josh McDaniels. Very smart, really understands offense and the quarterback position. I often said, I'm a Cowboys fan. I like to get on Jason Garrett. Jason Garrett's actually an excellent quarterback coach.
Right.
If you told me you hired him to be don't hire him as your offensive coordinator, because you're going to run the ball on 2nd and 14 and then throw a 2-yard pass on 3rd and 12. But in terms of just working with quarterbacks, he's excellent. A guy that John will remember who made a few appearances in the fire sale, Paul Hackett, was an awful coach, an awful offensive coordinator, but a great quarterback coach. So, I think that's what McDaniels is going to bring to the table. And I think the Raiders, the AFC's tough, but I kind of like them a little bit this year.
After it's said and done, because I asked this question to Big John last night, a lot of analysts will tell you, hey, Derek Carr is a fine quarterback, maybe top 10, nowhere near the elite, not in the top 5. After he has all the pieces, Devontae Adams, Waller, the running back, I guess offensive line may or may not be a bit of a question. After it's said and done this year, because of the McDaniels factor, do you see Carr being closer to top 5 status or kind of remaining about the top 10 quarterback? It's a tough question. I know a lot of great quarterbacks, but
I put guys like, Derek Carr and Dak Prescott kind of in that same category. They're probably not good enough to win a bunch of games on their own. But if you surround them with good players and they're really good quarterbacks. I would argue this. Look at the quarterbacks in the AFC. I know people love Lamar Jackson. Is he an elite quarterback in the AFC? People will get on guys like Carr and support Lamar Jackson because he's a little flashier. But when you look at the quarterback play in the AFC, it's scary. So I think Carr is good enough to win games. I think he's a little underrated. but is he an elite quarterback? I mean, I don't know. Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes are elite quarterbacks. I wouldn't put him in that ranking right
You
now.
know, Tom, what's hilarious to me is your answer was almost exactly word for word what I told William yesterday.
Pretty much.
Like
Pretty
Carr,
much.
like, yeah, great minds think alike, because I said the exact same thing. I like Carr, and for years it's been criminal how they've crapped on this poor guy, like that. Everything in Vegas was his fault with the Raiders, you know. But
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is, I said, is he top 5? Can you easily name 5 quarterbacks better than him? Yes. Probably 3 of them are in the same division with him, right? I mean, so that's what makes it tough when it comes to saying he's top 5. But you're right, with a good team, give him a good defense. Now that he's got the weapons around him, now it's put up or shut up. He has to go deep into the playoffs. The problem is he's in the best division in football right now. So we'll see what happens. But you know, Tom, as much as I'd love to talk more about this, we brought you on for one specific purpose, 2 specific purposes. The first one is going to be a talk about the draft. I always thought it was amazing when you took your knowledge of college football and was able to translate it. Like for listeners who don't know who Tom is, he was the first one on the Priest Holmes train back in the day. And, you know, all of us, William, yourself included, myself included, all of us as fantasy journalists, we all have the one guy we're all proud of, you know, like we saw this greatness before anybody else, right? Tom's had a couple of those, but Priest Holmes was the best one. As soon as that guy moved to Kansas City, Tom was on it. He goes, take him in the first round, take him ahead of Tomlinson, take him ahead of everybody. It doesn't matter. Take Priest Holmes. And sure enough, that panned out. And I, don't let Tom fool you. I follow him on Twitter. He'll mention it at least twice a season. Hey, my Priest Holmes call. Trust me, you know.
Tom, actually, my question to you is, because I did the same thing. I had to sit my partner down. I said, we got to talk about Priest Holmes. And he was why. I go, these numbers are just astronomical. They just don't make any sense. So we just kind of like started whittling it down. And we kind of put him more in line. And then he actually blew and hit those numbers that I had projected. And I always take pride in that. I can't remember why I came up with those numbers so many years ago, but what was your trigger to go, Priest Holmes is going to knock it out of the park?
Well, you know, sometimes I think guys get dinged for being injured in college. You know, if you remember, Priest Holmes suffered a bad knee injury in college. Right. And it took him this was a while back. It's not like today where knee injuries, you throw a Band-Aid on it and they're playing. This was, you know, quite a few years ago. So I thought it took him a couple of years to get back to the same back I saw early on at Texas. And his last year in Baltimore, you could see when he was getting the ball, you know, he wasn't a full-time back, but he was making plays. He looked like that guy before the knee injury. And then you're going to a offense like Kansas City, who was going to use him in space, who was going to try to get him the ball in the passing game. So I thought it all added up to a perfect, you know, the right player in the right situation at the right time.
Perfect. I agree. Yeah. I forgot about that. And maybe that's what triggered me. It was so long ago, but you're right. He was going to a more explosive offense, and man, it was just a bad move for the Ravens to let him walk. I think, if I remember correctly, that's where he left, right?
Yeah.
Was it the Ravens? Yeah. Yeah. And he was such a nice guy also.
Yeah. Great guy.
It was easy to root for him.
Yeah, absolutely. But all right. So Tom, let's talk about the draft. First of all, though, let me hit you up with a question, because I think I don't know if we're on the cusp of something different in the NFL, but do you think most teams are putting a premium on the draft the way teams used to? Or are they looking to the models of the Rams who won the Super Bowl, maybe the way the Buccaneers built their team, you know, with a lot of free agents and a lot of key signings? Where do you think the NFL is? How do GMs and owners approach the draft? Is it still like number one on the list of things to do, or has the importance of the draft dropped a little bit, do you think?
I think it depends on the team and the organization. I mean, yeah, if you have Tom Brady, maybe the draft isn't as important to you, right? But I still think if you're a bottom to mid-tier team, you still have to draft well, and you have to draft well beyond the first round. I mean, you know that my number one thing I do in this world is complain about Jerry Jones.
Right.
And, you know, people get fooled by the Cowboys' talent. The Cowboys have front end talent. They don't have talent. The second two guys get hurt, there's nobody there to pick up the slack. And the reason is, and they've gotten better over the last couple of years with Jerry's son making more of the decisions.
Right.
But for years, the Cowboys, after round 1 or 2, those guys were in the league for like 2 years. And you're not only hurting your start, you're hurting your depth. I mean, everybody in the NFL has injuries. So for me, I always believe that part of the draft is where you're going to build winners, because not only do you get some starters out of there, you're getting depth, guys who have to come in when you have, I mean, a perfect example would be, people forget this sometimes because they just focus on Carson Wentz, but the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl, they had multiple big injuries. It's really one of the more remarkable runs that I've seen in the NFL. Not only was Nick Foles the quarterback, you're looking at starting left tackle, starting linebacker, some guys on the defensive line, I mean, secondary. They were decimated by injury, but they had done such a good job of building up their team, they were able to absorb that and make a Super Bowl run. So yeah, I still believe the draft is important. Now, I do think there's a little bit of a shift. And to be honest with you, Belichick has kind of done this a little bit in New England. Belichick's an average drafter. All right. We all know that.
Oh, yeah.
His biggest strength is looking at guys he didn't get in the draft that he thinks fits his system, that went to other teams and become available. He's gotten a lot of bargains from like the Lions and the Browns, players people thought were done, but Bill thinks can fit his system. I remember when I was there, Bill had Paul Posluszny rated like a late round draft pick. And when we asked his assistant, well, why? And he said, he just doesn't think he fits this system. It's nothing against Paul, the player, but in New England, he won't be the same player that he is elsewhere. Right. So, I do think if teams that scout other teams' players can really do well beyond the draft.
Right. And I remember Belichick, all those, like he got Wes Welker, people forget, came from Miami. Corey Dillon at one point stepped up and became a major runner for them. Yeah. Of course, Belichick always believes in cutting somebody a year too early than a year too late. And Tom, you brought this up to me. There are positions he'll pay for, and there are positions he figures he can scheme out of existence if he had to. So he'll pay for, obviously he paid for quarterback all those years. He pays for his offensive and defensive line, but you won't see him give top dollar for a corner. Think of all the corners that left New England when they wanted money, right? Ty Law, Stephon Gilmore, all these guys. Like once they say, well, I want the big contract, he's like, yeah, I'll see you later. Right? So he's smart in the way he divvies up his money. So you're right. Okay, so the draft is still important, but maybe not as important as it used to be. But where I do think it's important, see if you agree with me, is at quarterback for one reason. You draft a good young quarterback and he's starting within, say, his second season, you've got a nice 3 to 4 year window now where you have an affordable quarterback that you can build around. One of Williams' big gripes is as soon as these guys become all world and they want that extension or they go for their second contract, now you can't afford to have a team around them for the most part. So, you got Aaron Rodgers for 45, 50 million a year. Now what?
60 million.
60 million. Now what? So that's always, to me, the timing is always good, right? So let's get a little bit deeper into the draft now.
Hold on, Tom, real quick, going back to the 80s and 90s, hearing you talk, it sounds like Belichick, I didn't even realize it, but he became or has become the Eddie DeBartolo of the modern era, because that's what the 49ers did during the Montana era, that where they were just consistently vying for that NFC championship to go to the Super Bowl. They would get those free agents with a couple years left who wanted a ring more than they wanted that big fat paycheck. And it seems like Belichick does something similar, bringing in some of these veterans who don't have a ring and kind of fit in their system. And according to you, John, where he doesn't always want to pay. It doesn't matter if they're receiver or running back. I mean, Dylan was one you brought up right there. Would you say that's a fair assessment based on what you saw?
Yeah, no doubt about it. He's always comparing the draft to the people who are out there. Remember, he got Randy Moss for a song and dance. That's right. And, he's comparing Randy's talent. And I can tell you this right now. Randy wasn't one problem in New England. I really couldn't believe one of the nicest guys I've ever met, hung out with practice squad players. I don't know if the change of scenery did something, or maybe if things were overblown in the media, but I think Bill met with him and realized, hey, this guy's not going to hurt my locker room, and we're getting, so that's how he does things like that too. There might be guys, Bill doesn't do this often because he thinks, character and stuff in the locker room matter. But if there's a guy who's a little shaky, and he can bring him in for a short period of time, the thing that happened in Dallas, I don't know if this is common knowledge or because I knew a reporter there, but Bill Parcells signed off for T.O. for 1 year. He says, you can deal with a guy like T.O. for 1 year. Right. When Jerry gave him the extension, that's when Bill said, I'm too old, I'm going to the track, have fun. You know what I mean? Because Bill will take a headache for a year to win. He's not going to do it for 3 or 4 years. So right. I think they have a similar, thought process in that.
Yeah, and obviously Belichick comes from the Parcells tree. So, it's obvious that he probably had to look, Belichick, more than anybody, had to put up with Lawrence Taylor. As great as he was, when you listen to all those stories of like Taylor falling asleep in the middle of a defensive play scheming, and Belichick would be losing his mind, and Taylor would wake up and go, yeah, I know. Harry's supposed to cover that, and I've got Collins on the corner, and he knew where everything was because he was a prodigy, and it used to drive Belichick crazy because he couldn't control that. Right. And so I can imagine him being like that. He's just like Parcells, but okay.
Belichick never told him, hey, just take another line and wake up.
But cool. All right. So let's get to the first general question about the draft, because I think this is something everyone's talking about. Talk to 10 different people about this quarterback class coming out, Tom. You'll get 10 different opinions. Anywhere from there'll be 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round, I've heard a lot of people, all the way down to there are not going to be any quarterbacks taken in the first round. It runs like, I don't remember it being this wild to swing in a couple of seasons. So first of all, 2-part question. Will there be quarterbacks taken in the first round? And if so, who are the likely candidates to which team?
Yeah, they're probably almost guaranteed to be quarterbacks taken in the first round. And I can go back through history. The year Locker went in round 1, and the kid from Florida State that went to the Vikings is slipping my name.
Christian Ponder.
Yeah, Ponder, who's married to
number 7 overall.
But like that year,
it's funny, we'll remember how hot his wife is, but we won't remember his name, right?
But I just remember thinking, these guys, if this was a good quarterback class, these guys wouldn't sniff the first round.
Right.
EJ Manuel, the year
EJ Manuel.
Right.
That never been more shocked in my life than when EJ Manuel was a first round pick.
To the Bills, crazy.
I think teams are always going to reach for quarterbacks, but one of the reasons I bet Pickett to be the first quarterback taken at plus 200 is I don't think the odds represent the players. There's no way you're going to tell me Malik Willis is the unquestioned number 1 quarterback in this class. Now he might go first over Pickett, but in terms of the odds, it just doesn't make sense. I think that happened when there was rumors that the Lions were going to take him number 2. The Lions aren't taking Malik Willis number 2. There's no, I've seen the guy. I understand he tested well, but the guy's not good enough to go number 2 overall. Right. But I do think you'll see at least 2, maybe 3, just because of what you said. Teams need quarterbacks, and they're willing to roll the dice on a guy they think can come into their system and do well. So I don't know if any of them are traditional first round talents, but I think we'll see a couple go.
So Tom, I'm sorry, John, but Tom, Malik Willis, small school. I mean, to me, he looks like a project. Maybe he has a talent there, but he looks like a project. But in this day and age, the fans expect these players to come in and play immediately. And even in EJ Manuel, who you mentioned, was raw.
Right.
And my question is, is it fair to a Malik Willis to be drafted? And I mean, that's how life works. And he'll get the contract, and God bless him for it. He'll get some money. But it seems as if drafting Malik Willis going in the first round, it could do him so much more disservice. because the pressure for him to start will be immense wherever he goes versus letting him develop a bit. I guess what I'm asking is, I kind of don't know what I'm asking. It just seems like a small project kid, like you said. He's not as good as the perception out there, but that's not necessarily him as much as where he played and how much he still needs to grow. Do you see where the draft going that high could hurt him long term with his development?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. He's got skills. He's got a good skill set, but he's
Right.
nowhere near ready to come in and play right now. And I think that's what happens with a lot of these guys. Listen, there's only a couple John Elways and Peyton Mannings who would have been
Right.
great no matter where they go. Troy Aikman tells the story all the time. The best thing that ever happened to him is he got injured in his rookie year because he was getting beat up so badly. He was close to checking out mentally. Remember that Cowboys team, how bad it was, and then Steve Walsh came in and took the
Oh yeah,
hits
that's
for the
right.
rest of the year. But Aikman, I remembered when Aikman said that, and I always think of a guy I liked who never had a real chance was David Carr.
That's
David
the
Carr
one we
got
all
beat
talk
up,
about.
yeah, got
Always
beat up
bring that
so
up.
badly in his first 2 years. You know, John, your boy Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
Listen, Daniel Jones has shown some decent skill when he throws the football, but he's been getting killed back there. So
I like this Tom guy.
so it really hurts your confidence. So I think quarterbacks, again, there's a couple of guys who've come out who, Peyton Manning, wherever he went, was going to be great. But guys like, Willis and Kenny Pickett, it's really going to depend on what team they go to, the right organization, if they put the right pieces around them, if they give them enough time. If the Lions draft Malik Willis #2, listen, they got Jared Goff, right, who the fans can't stand. So you're going to be forced to play Malik Willis at some point this year, and I think it'll be a disaster for him.
I agree with you. I don't think the Lions are going to take him. They may trade down for someone else, but I think if Hutchinson is there, they'll take Hutchinson #2. But among the quarterbacks, the way I see it, Carolina has to do something. So whether they stick at 6 and take a quarterback or pull, trade back and get somebody later in the first round, I don't know. But I think that Panthers spot is going to be the first one you get somebody taking it. And I think the Panthers would take Willis. My thing is, I think Pickett is the most pro-ready.
Yeah.
Where Pickett goes, look, everyone thinks the dream scenario is he falls to the Steelers. The Steelers take him for a lot of different reasons. They needed a quarterback. The tragedy with Haskins. They've only got Trubisky, so why not pick up Pickett? I don't think Pickett makes it to the Steelers, quite honestly. I think you've got the Saints that might trade up, package those 2 picks they got from the Eagles and trade up. I think you've got the Seahawks who might trade up just enough, either with the Giants or the Jets, to get Pickett after Willis goes. How do you say Pickett and Willis going, and where do you see them going?
Yeah, I think in that top 15 range. I think, like you said, if they start to listen, we know the Panthers want a quarterback because they've been in on virtually every quarterback that's available. It just depends on where they think these guys slide in on their draft board, if they think 6 is too high. But yeah, that'll be a position. But I do think, as we start going down that top 10, if no quarterbacks picked, then you're going to start looking for teams to trade up a little bit if they really like one of these guys. So I do think top 15 for sure. One of them will go, maybe top 10. But you're right. That Panthers spot is the first spot that's interesting for a quarterback. And it really just depends how they see these two. And if there's one they really like that they want to take that high.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Tom, it's only been a couple of years, well, maybe 3 or 4, but college is your shtick. Trubisky was so, he kept moving up the draft board, got drafted highly. A lot of people believe he flopped in Chicago because of Chicago, not him. It seems even though the Steelers signed him, they're ready to write him off. And you mentioned Daniel Jones, which I preached that to John, and he kind of disagrees. He's not a Daniel Jones fan. But David Carr, we always talk about too. Do you think Trubisky never had the talent people assumed he did, or do you think he's a product right now of the Daniel Jones, David Carr type situation, and he could actually thrive? The reason I ask is because the Steelers must have seen something in him for them to have signed him.
Yeah, I think he's an example of what you just said earlier about a guy going way too early and was expected to play. This guy played like 1 season in college. And again, going back to Parcells, his thinking on quarterbacks, you had to play in college. Like, it's the old Achilles Smith, Jamarcus Russell.
Right.
These guys played very, very little in college, and then they went up draft boards compared to somebody like, Deshaun Watson, who, Russell Wilson, guys who play a lot, where you can just evaluate more, not just them physically, but mentally. Yeah, how do they react to situations? So I think Trubisky was one of those guys that you just mentioned that went too high and it hurt him. He obviously has talent. Now he goes to Pittsburgh. He sat a little bit. I think that helped him a lot. Things might slow down for him. I think it's interesting. We'll see how he looks in Pittsburgh, but a guy who just got thrown in way, way too early.
And John, I apologize. I told John, hey, John, you're going to drive this.
No. Look, I love just hearing Tom talk. So I don't care who asks the question.
Yeah. So in a perfect draft where there's no moving her up, where would you see Malik and Pickett's actual true value? Like towards the end of the first round, the second round? I mean, obviously the jockeying changes everything, but in a perfect world, where should they fall?
Yeah, I would say later first, early second. More, remember Andy Dalton was an early second round pick, right? And I thought that's about where Andy Dalton should be drafted. I think Pickett, very similar to Dalton, physically might not be a great starter, might be a good starter, and a really good backup. But that, I'm not saying that's what he's going to be. I'm saying kind of like Andy Dalton is kind of where I see Pickett. And Dalton was a good quarterback it's not like he was a nobody, right, but that kind of area. And again, Willis, will probably get overdrafted just because he can throw the ball 60 yards on his knees, although I've never seen a quarterback throw from his knees in the NFL. So I don't know what that means.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that later first round area is where I would consider him based just on talent.
Now, Tom,
we saw Kyle Bowler do that. And where did that get him?
Right.
But Tom, let me ask you this, since you're sort of touching on the subject, so I'll just ask it, and if you don't want to answer, I understand, brother. But do you think Malik Willis is being, like, I remember one time you had this great comment, and it was when Andrew Luck and Robert Griffith III they were both coming out in the same draft, and you had one of the most insightful comments that was off the cuff. I know you threw it out on a radio show somewhere, but it made so much sense to me. You said everyone's assuming that Luck is the pocket passer because he's white, and Griffith is the running quarterback because he's black, he's African-American. And you said nothing could be further than the truth. Luck runs like crazy out of the pocket. He's a good out of the pocket. And Griffith is the one, yes, he can move, but he'd rather stay in the pocket. He'd rather throw from the pocket. And you said these racial lenses that we see through sometimes really blur the truth. Like, why is it that every white slot receiver gets compared to Wes Welker or Julian Edelman, right? It's totally discounting what those guys did, right? So do you feel Malik Willis, I'm not going to say suffers because I think it benefits him in this case, but do you think people are looking at Malik Willis and saying, hey, he's another black quarterback from a small school. Maybe he's another Lamar Jackson. Like, do you think those comparisons are superficially made to people like Lamar Jackson or to Kyler Murray, because they're like, hey, it's another black quarterback. He must move around. He must be fast, right? Do you think that even the media gets sucked into that? Or do you think we're beyond that somehow in this day and age?
No, I just think it's lazy analysis.
There you
And
go.
you mentioned, a guy who just passed in Dwayne Haskins. Remember what Stephen A said about Dwayne Haskins when he came out? A running quarterback. There's never been less of a running quarterback in the history of football than Dwayne. I never saw him run once at Ohio State. He's the epitome of your old Dan Marino pocket passer. But that was even Stephen A just being a little lazy, and he admitted it after. I didn't really do my homework, but I think that's what it is. It's more just being lazy. Like, every black quarterback now is going to be compared to Mike Vick, right? Because Mike Vick was that guy who came in and kind of changed things. But, I just think it's unfair to him. We heard it from Russell Wilson coming out of college. Now, listen, when Russell Wilson has to move, he can move. Russell Wilson's a pocket quarterback. Dak is a pocket quarterback. Dak hates to run. He says it all the time. I don't like to run. So I think you just got to watch and see what their strengths are. For instance, Matt Corral is going to run a heck of a lot more than Malik Willis, a lot more.
There you go.
So it all depends on their style of play.
Yeah, no, and I love the way you phrase that. It's if it's not outright racial sort of, I don't want to use the word discrimination, but influence, bias, whatever you want to call it.
It's
It's
stereotyping.
certainly
Let's be honest.
lazy. Yeah, it's certainly lazy, because it's just like you figure who's going to challenge you, right? If it's somebody who doesn't know football, they're going to be, yeah, of course, the black quarterback's going to run, the white guy's going to be slow as a statue, right? And then you're right, it's very lazy. It's very easy to fall into those traps. All right,
Tom, I just saw that on Twitter with your former guy over New England. I don't know if you were there when he was there, the black quarterback who started for Indianapolis.
Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah, somebody's there. Well, he's black. He's got to be a great runner. And somebody said what you said, John.
Yeah.
Have you watched the Colts play?
Yeah.
And you're right. Tom, thank you. That's a great way to put it. I have to remember that. That's just lazy analysis. It's better to say it that way than you're stereotyping and then get in a racial argument,
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. All right. So let's move on to the next one. Tom, I'm going to give you a two-part question, open-ended. You answer it any way that you want. Which position do you feel is the deepest in this draft? And maybe talk about some of those prospects. And which one do you feel is the shallowest? And talk about some of those prospects, maybe.
Well, obviously, offensive line is pretty deep. We know that receiver is very deep. Listen, my sons play center, so I'm a big fan of Tyler Linderbaum out of Iowa. He's been one of the most dominant linemen in college football the last couple of years. So he's a guy I really like. In terms of receivers, I think Ohio State's interesting. I bet Garrett Wilson would be the first receiver taken, and I think he will be. But Chris Olave is a really, really good football player. And I think that's the guy I'm kind of waiting to see where he goes. And if he goes to the right offense, because I think he can be an immediate impact. So those would be the two positions I think are really deep, are offensive line and receiver.
Where do you think Olave, for example, would have the greatest impact? What team would you like to see him go to, reasonably speaking?
I think a team like the Broncos or someone like that, somebody these rookie receivers are going to do better with established quarterbacks, right? Mm-hmm. Guys that they're going to, Russell Wilson, they're going to throw to guys who are open, not their, they
not their best friends, down. Right?
Yeah. So, I think that would be my answer. Obviously, it wouldn't be bad if he went to Green Bay. They got an established quarterback there who might need some help on the outside. So those veteran quarterbacks are going to make rookie receivers look better. So that I think a team like that would help them.
That's great. And you mentioned Linderbaum at center, right? Is he an all-around center, or is he more of a run blocker, pass blocker? Do you see him having a complete game? How does he play out in your scouting report?
Yeah, he can play different positions. I mean, he played center in college, but that's why I think he'll go in round one, because you rarely see pure centers go in round one. But you're looking at a guy who can play multiple positions on the offensive line. So, I mean, he's athletic. Obviously, if you play at Iowa, you know how to run block. They only throw 4 passes a game. So very athletic in the open field. So I really like him. And my favorite, the guy the Chiefs drafted last year at center was phenomenal. I'm getting old. I can't remember names anymore, but he started from the first preseason game to the end of the year, was one of PFF's top rated centers, really made an impact on that offensive line. So I think he's a very similar kind of player. Well,
the Chiefs in general last year did a great job on that line, going from that horrible collapse with the injuries to Fisher and everything in the Super Bowl. To be able to rebuild that in one season, I thought they did a great job. Bringing in Orlando Brown Jr., drafting that center, and I'm almost tempted to say Lindsey for some reason, but I could be wrong about that. I would have thought William would have taken the time to look it up. He usually does. He's always correcting me on the show, but yeah, I think they did a great job in general putting that line back together.
Humphrey.
Humphrey. There you go.
That's how you know you're getting old. When you forget a name like Creed Humphrey.
I've got 15 years on you, kid. So imagine how I feel.
He was phenomenal. I mean, I was rewinding his plays, showing them to my son. So those positions aren't sexy, but those guys can come in and make an immediate impact for it and help improve a team.
Yeah,
the trenches.
Yeah, and then you think of someone like Quentin Nelson when the Jets traded up for Darno, and the Colts said, hey, we're more than happy to take the extra draft capital and take Nelson, because he's going to be the best, right? And it worked out that way for them. So that was pretty good. Which position do you think is the lightest? Is it the quarterbacks, or is there another position?
I think it's the quarterbacks. This is a very I don't know if we're going to see any really good NFL starters come out of this class. I mean, you'll definitely have some starters, but I don't know what their ceiling is. I mean, there's no Joe Burrow. There's no guys like that in this class. I don't think. Right. I do think Pickett is probably one of the best ones, and like I said, Andy Dalton sounds like it's dinging him. It's not. Andy Dalton was a good quarterback in Cincinnati. And so, I mean, if that's what he becomes, I don't think it's an awful pick. But I don't see a lot of these quarterbacks making a big impact as NFL starters.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that Andy Dalton. I think for years, statistically speaking, he was always he was the equivalent of the Mendoza line. Like, yep. Andy Dalton was always the middle of the road statistically in every category. So if you were above Dalton, you were above average. If you were below him, you were losing your job the next year. He always seemed to be that really middle of the road guy. But like you said, a good team, he could take you to the playoffs probably. All right, let me ask you about, I'm sorry, I was going to ask one more thing. The edge rushers. I think they're pretty deep this year. Who do you have being the best edge rusher, do you think? Is it Thibodeau? Is it Hutchinson? Is it Johnson from Florida State? Who do you got there?
I have Thibodeau being number one.
Really? Okay.
I thought, listen, Clowney is a great player, and I see him being a lot like him, not just on the field, but I think last year he might have sat a little longer than he had to. Look, I don't punish kids for that. If that was my son and he had all this money waiting for him, I don't know if I want him rushing back earlier than he should be from injuries. You know what? That's a fine line for me. So I'm not gonna criticize him for that. I mean, when he was on the field 100% healthy, I thought he was him and Nakobe Dean, the linebacker for Georgia, were the two best defensive players I saw. So I would say him. Obviously, you know what you're getting in Hutchinson. The guy's a great player. He's a leader. So those two, I think, are a little bit above the rest of the pack.
And that's a natural fit for the Lions. Hutchinson to Detroit at number 2. That seems to be almost like one of those storybook things. Like, we're going to draft this kid. He's local. I think they said it's 30 miles from his house to go to play home games. So and he's really good. So unless the Jags take him at number 1, the Lions will probably end up with him. I'm sorry, William, I cut you up before.
I was just curious, who do you see after Willis and Pickett going and the quarterback? In what round do you think that individual would go? Because I'm thinking the middle of the draft at this point.
Yeah, I think Matt Corral could sneak in round 1. I think if there's 3 quarterbacks that go in round, just because he's got a lot of traits that I think NFL teams would like. He surveys the field well. I mean, he doesn't have prototypical size, but he can do a lot of things, that teams like. Then you're looking at Desmond Ridder. I think his ceiling's a little bit limited. I think he's more of a Ryan Fitzpatrick, which again, that's not a negative. Ryan Fitzpatrick has had a great NFL career as a sometimes starter, phenomenal backup. So I could see Ridder being that type of guy in round 2.
Cool. Excellent. All right, let's move on a little bit more. First, NFL draft talk here. Almost surprisingly, there's 8 teams that have 2 first-round picks this year. 8 teams control half of the first round. And I'll read them off quick. The Lions are at number 2 and 32. The Texans are at 3 and 13. The Jets are at 4 and 10. The Giants are at 5 and 7. So they almost have back-to-back picks. You have the Eagles at number 15 and number 18. Interestingly enough, neither one of those were theirs originally. The Saints have 16 and 19. The Packers have 22 and 28. The Chiefs, 29 and 30. Tom, who stays put? Who's moving around? Who's wheeling and dealing, and who's staying put?
Well, I think what this means is a lot of teams there's going to be a lot of movement. When you have teams with multiple first round picks, you're going to see teams move up and down, and again, just going back to New England, because I was there and I know a little bit. when the Patriots have 2 first-round picks, they always thought about getting another one next year if you didn't have guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you thought that draft was going to be better, obviously NFL teams are looking a year ahead in these drafts, and if you thought there was going to be more frontline players next year than this year, maybe get one next season instead. I gotta think. I don't know what they can. I got to think the Packers are here to do something, because it just doesn't make sense to me that Aaron Rodgers didn't know what was going on
With
there
Davante
before
Adams, right?
yeah, with Davante Adams before he re-signed. We didn't hear Rodgers say anything negative about it, and as I'm sure everyone knows, Aaron will give his opinion when he feels like giving his opinion. So the fact that he didn't come out and really rip the organization about it makes me think that was known. But I also think that the Packers have to get this guy some weapons now. He re-signed. They got 2 first-round picks. The team I think is interesting. Obviously, the Giants are sitting there with 5 and 7. They can do a lot of things. I don't think the Giants have had 3 of the worst coaches in the history of pro football the last 6 years.
Right.
It's hard to do that. It really is.
You have to work at it.
Yeah, right. Just based on that, I think they're going to be improved. They were also the most injured team in the NFL last year. You take those 2 things, and I'm not saying they're going to the Super Bowl. I'm saying 8-8, sniffing around the playoffs in the NFC East. So I think them and the other NFC East team, the Eagles, I don't know if I buy into their quarterback. I'm a big, in terms of a person, Jalen Hurts is about as nice and as a leader at the college game.
Right.
Always his interviews. Every time I heard him talk, I said, take this guy number 1. I think he's probably going to be a future senator.
Right.
He's got that kind of presence. I want to root for him. I don't know if he's the guy, but them having 2 picks and the Giants having 2 picks, and I do think the New York Jets will be improved. I don't know if we'll see it in the win-loss record, because they play in the AFC and it's so tough. It's going to come down to some games they might win or might lose. So I think those teams are interesting with the 2 picks.
Do you think the Saints are sniffing around for one of the quarterbacks? Now, it's interesting given their cap situation, given the fact that they just signed Jameis Winston, who statistically, we always love the big numbers he put up, but he was a turnover machine. Now, it started to turn around last year before he got hurt. A completely different brand of ball. I don't know what's going to happen under Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen traditionally is a defensive coach, right? So is New Orleans looking to compete and draft 2 trench players at 16 and 19 potentially, and say, okay, we're just going to continue to build our defense. We got to replace Williams in the defensive, in the secondary. We got to replace Armstrong on the offensive line. Do you think that's where they're going? Or do you think they try to package 16 and 19 to move up to get a Pickett or a Willis? Or do you see them trading down for more capital next year? I mean, how does that work for you?
That all depends on what they think of those 2 quarterbacks. That's a team, if they like one of them, sure. If they don't, I could see them doing the latter and getting another first-round pick next year, ride in with Winston this year, and then you're in position to do some damage with a much deeper expected quarterback class next year. So again, that's how these teams roll. They're going to rank not just Willis and Pickett. They're going to rank them compared to the quarterbacks coming out next year. Now, if they got 5 guys, if they have Pickett number 1 this year and 4 or 5 guys rated ahead of them next year, they ain't moving up to get Kenny Pickett. They're going to get another first-round pick for next year. Right. So those are kinds of things that I would look for from the Saints, because I do think their talent is still pretty good. And obviously no coach thinks they're rebuilding. They all want to compete now. I mean, unless you're Lovie Smith, maybe, or Dan Campbell. But so obviously Dennis Allen, he wants to win right now. So I think it all depends on how they have those 2 quarterbacks ranked compared to next year's class.
Now, what about Baker Mayfield? Now, to me, this is interesting, right? Now, listen, personally, I don't know if he's a game-changing quarterback. I don't know if he's transformational or not. I do know he's better than anything coming out of the draft this year. We know what's going on in Cleveland. He's never going to play for Cleveland again. Is someone going to make a trade for him, Tom? Do you think either during the draft, do you think it's the case that if someone's got their eye on Pickett or Willis, they go early? You don't swing a deal for those 2, that you say, all right, you want to take a 3rd for Mayfield? You want to take a 2nd for Mayfield, depending on how much money is eaten and whatnot by Cleveland? Or do you see Mayfield getting cut? How do you see that situation working itself out?
Yeah, that's interesting because there's a couple of things about Baker Mayfield. I never thought he was going to be great. When he came out of school, Greg Casale, who knows, is one of the smartest football guys ever, showed multiple tapes of him rolling to his right. Even when he wasn't really under pressure, he always drifted to his right.
Mm-hmm.
So Casale said NFL teams are going to see this on tape and they're going to come from the right and make him go the other way where he's not comfortable. And I have seen that quite a bit. So that was a very good nugget that he gave pre-draft. But I will say this about Baker Mayfield. That guy was playing hurt last year.
Yes, very tough.
As fans, we want it both ways. We want you to play hurt. Then when you play hurt, we're mad that you're not playing up to your ability. So, that you can say a lot about Baker Mayfield, but I was impressed last year with his toughness because he was in a lot of pain. His throws, whether you like the guy or not, his throws weren't close. That had something to do with his shoulder. So I do think whoever trades for him will get a better version of Baker Mayfield than we saw last year. I just don't know if he has the head and just the overall talent, to be, if the Panthers traded for him, is he a lot better than what they already have? So I think it's a tough one, but I do think Baker Mayfield is better than he played last year.
Yeah,
Tom, I got to step in because that's exactly what I've been saying, and I think the reason he came out with what he said was because he did lay it all on the line for that team last year, and they pretty much stabbed him in the back. However you want to look at it and compare him and Deshaun Watson or whatever. But the way, look, Jimmy Haslam's been known as a bum in NFL circles. The FBI may still be investigating him for all we know. He's not what you would call an owner you turn your back on. And I think he felt completely betrayed. And people forget the Browns, I'll say they're nothing but dirt. They're squat dirt in terms of their playoff appearances and wins until Mayfield got there.
Yep.
And that win they got was over their most vaunted arch rivals, the Steelers. So he did a lot for that city to lift them up. But that said, I'm with you. I'm like, well, how good a QB is he? I'm not saying I agree to any assessment as much as he took the team to the playoffs and then he got hurt and he played hurt. He didn't check out. And I'm like, from an emotional and mental standpoint, that's what I want in a player. What I don't like about him is he seems a bit he's still like a big kid.
Immature. He's immature.
I think if he matures a little bit, I'm hoping he can surprise, because I love those stories, because those are the stories for average Joes like us to aspire to look up to go to your kid. That's who you want to be. Not necessarily the maturity level, but in terms of how he laid it on the field and how he gave it 100%. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And, people I'll tell you what, I heard a lot of things about Kyler Murray coming out, that he's a miserable person, that people can't. Have you ever seen Kyler Murray on the sidelines? He's all by himself.
Yeah.
Nobody's around him. He looks miserable all the time. Listen, he's a phenomenal player. I'm not saying anything about it, but again, there's another guy you're talking about being mature. You have to wonder if that's why the Cardinals aren't ready to unload all that money onto him. I don't know how well he gets along with teammates, and I always find it interesting when there's a guy always sitting by himself, never talking to any of his teammates. I mean,
Tom, looking at it
odd to me.
Looking at it from a draft perspective, and he's only been a couple years out. And I've gotten back into the sports. I was actually a political guy as of recent, but when I see his size, and then when I followed him the last couple of years, but superficially, not in depth, what I seemed to see was a small kid who just got tired of getting hit. And that there's nothing wrong with that. It's a brutal sport. Yeah. And when you're smaller, and when I saw him in the second half and I saw that Rams game, I was like the rest of the analysts, like, I'm not surprised by how he played. I thought that underhand throw that intercepted, the Rams intercepted, was pick six too, I think.
The end zone.
Yeah. I mean, that to me epitomized who Kyler Murray is. And that's not taking away from him, but who Kyler Murray is now that the NFL's kind of figured him out. And I'm not saying I'm right, but how right or wrong am I? And do you think the Cardinals may be more concerned with his size versus a maturity issue?
Yeah, certainly. Listen, Lamar Jackson runs a lot. Kyler runs a lot. There's only one Cam Newton. I've
Yeah.
seen Cam Newton in person. He looks like the Undertaker. He's huge. I mean, you can see that he's a big guy, but guys that big, once you see him in real life, you're just like, oh my God, this guy plays quarterback. So Cam was able to take that beating for a few years only because he's so darn big. He was giving out the blows half the time.
And Roethlisberger.
Andrew Luck.
Roethlisberger.
You know,
Yeah, big
Andrew
guys
Luck is
like
a
that.
runner. Andrew Luck is a big guy who's a runner, and he ended up leaving the game, I think, because of the beatdown he got.
Right.
I mean, other reasons, but he took some vicious shots, and he was a big guy. So if you were an NFL GM consulting with the Arizona Cardinals, would you say lock him up or let's wait?
That's a tough one because I think he's a really good player. I don't know about the other stuff. The stuff on the field, I think he can certainly win. The thing that bothers me about what's going on there is something wasn't right with that team at the end of the season. I don't know if it was him or if it was, Kingsbury. I don't know why, but that was an absolute, they didn't play well at the end of the year, and then a complete no-show in the playoffs.
Yeah, right.
I think this is an interesting team entering this year early on to see how they bounce back from what happened at the end of last season.
And they did have some veteran leadership on that team, which makes it even weirder, right? It's not like they were a completely young team that fell apart. I mean, you had J.J. Watt, Chandler Jones, James Conner. Like, you had veterans on that team. And for it to collapse like that, you're absolutely right. Now, my theory was either the coaching staff was trying to keep him in the pocket, meaning Murray. They were trying to protect him by keeping him in the pocket where he wasn't comfortable. That wasn't his game. Or B, to what you guys alluded to, he's a small guy and he was getting the crap knocked out of him. And he just decided, like, he got gun shy. Like, I'm not going to scramble. Because I noticed that a lot in those Cardinals games. He just wasn't as mobile. He wasn't as electric as he was. Right. I mean, I know at one point he had a twisted ankle, but at that, I don't know. You're right. Something weird happened, especially on offense, where that team just was not performing the way it was. So you're right. I'd be interested in seeing what happens there. All right, let's do some quick things here. Give me a sleeper and give me a bust coming out of the draft. This is your famous going up, going down from the fire sale, Tom.
Well, the guy I really like, I understand running backs aren't what they used to be, but Brian Robinson out of Alabama, someone's going to get a heck of a player in the third round. I thought Miles Sanders was a bit overdrafted. They kind of remind me of each other a little bit. He's not your Derek Henry. He might not carry the ball 25 times, but how many guys are still in the league that do that? Right. I think Brian Robinson, if he goes to the right team who utilizes him well, is going to catch the ball. He's a tough inside runner for his size. So, he's a guy I really like, and I think he's going to be more valuable than his draft position for sure. A bust. Let me think for a quick second. George Pickens, the wide receiver out of Georgia, has always been talented. I don't know if he's never really lived up. I mean, he's been injured, but I think someone's going to overdraft him. That's the guy I don't think he's in quite the league and class as some of these other top receivers coming out. So I think it'll be interesting if somebody falls in love with his pure athleticism and takes him too early.
There you go. Love the sleepers and the bust. Is there anybody who do you think is going to have the most impact for fantasy players on offense? Give me the player you think is going to have the most fantasy impact.
Yeah, again, I would look at Chris Olave where he goes. I think the other guy too is, and we don't know when he'll be ready, but Jamison Williams from Alabama is a phenomenal football player.
He's injured though, right?
Huh?
He's injured though, right?
Yeah, he's injured. That's more of a dynasty thing. If you're looking to pick up a guy more long term, I think the easiest position on offense to come into for the right team is running back. Breece Hall's going to go somewhere's in there. If he goes to the right team, I think he can make an early fantasy impact. But again, I would stick with Olave and even Brian Robinson in that third round area if he goes to the right spot.
I tend to agree with you. The only little pushback I'll give you, Tom, with respect, is rookie running backs usually have trouble because they're not good in pass
protection.
So in today's game
Yep.
where you're passing 70% of the plays, you need someone who won't get the quarterback killed.
Right. No
And,
doubt about it. If you
so-
you miss one block and
You're on the bench.
you're on the bench.
Oh, I think it was Steve Young, but your classic case, the rookie, and the quarterback was out. Was taken
Yeah.
out, and we never saw that rookie RB the rest of the game.
Yeah,
Happens a lot, but yeah. Well, Tom, a question regarding the Panthers. A lot of, not a lot, but some analysts, some people have been saying, look, it doesn't matter who they bring in at quarterback. They believe Rule, the head coach, isn't really all he's cracked up to be. What's your opinion on that? Because I'm like, and before you answer from that perspective, was Darnold overrated coming out? I mean, is what we're seeing from Darnold what he really is, or being with the Jets and then going to the Panthers, is he another product of the David Carr phenomena?
I think it's a little bit of both. Again, he didn't play a ton in college, so I thought he was good. I thought he was a little bit overdrafted, and then you start off with the Jets and you're getting killed there. I thought he lost his. Getting that confidence back is so hard once you lose it, because It's the one thing that's hard. It's the intangible that's hard to do in a 40 and everything else, and that's called pocket presence.
Yes.
Some guys like Brady, it's amazing the way everything slows down around him, right in the pocket, and it looks like he's playing in slow motion. Most people don't have that. Mm-hmm. So early on in your career, when you're getting beaten up like those guys do, it's hard to get their confidence level back. I don't think Darnold's ever going to be a good NFL quarterback at this point. He had a chance to go to Carolina last year and rejuvenate his career, and it just wasn't there. So I think it's kind of foolish to think now all of a sudden he's going to be a good player. I think it's a little bit of both on him.
Okay. Tom, we're nearing the end of the show. Thank you for your draft insights, but let me ask you this now, because I always try to get some nostalgia going here. As we mentioned earlier, you're an OG Sports Grumblings, like you said, going back to Gridiron Grumblings, right? So get any stories, any old war stories, whether it was for the site when you were writing or when we were on Sirius XM. A lot of people don't know this. When we had our show on Sirius XM, one of the original shows on their fantasy channel, Tom was part of that broadcast booth. And the fans always loved Tom, always good to get into an argument with and everything. Tom, any stories you want to share with the folks?
Yeah, sure. Obviously you gave me my start. I wouldn't be where I am today without you giving me a chance. I wasn't where I wanted to be in life. I was struggling a little bit. To be honest with you, the fire sale is all I had to look forward to most weeks. So that's kind of kept me afloat. But the one thing I always remember is, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure we had the first fantasy podcast. And if it wasn't first, it was second or third. It was one of the first. Now everybody has, Joe Blow Fantasy on Twitter has his own fantasy podcast. But I really think we were ahead of our time. We did podcasting 15 years too early. We were crazy. We were bombastic. The stuff that people are making a ton of money for today.
I know.
We started way back in the late 90s. But so that's the thing I'll always remember, are those podcasts that I thought were excellent and probably about a decade too early for people.
I say that all the time, not to praise myself, because I think a lot of success that we had was from guys like you, who were unafraid to say what was on their mind. And I'll tell you along those lines, the podcast I'll never forget is when we took Don Banks to task, the writer from Sports Illustrated. He had penned an article saying how fantasy football was destroying the NFL, how fantasy football was destroying fans around the NFL. And Tom and I got on that podcast. I didn't say two words. Well, I said, hey, Tom, you want to talk about Don Banks? And I think for the next 2 hours, it was just Tom railing against Don Banks. And Don Banks this, and Don Banks couldn't, whatever. And interestingly enough, that was the demo tape I sent to Sirius XM. That episode was the one I sent to Sirius, where Steve Cohen, it's the VP of programming there, said, okay, you guys come in for a shot. And to show you how jacked up we are, I live in New York, William. Tom is from somewhere near Canada, as far as I could tell. It took him like, Tom, what was it, like a 6-hour train ride to get
It's
to
like
the studio?
3 to 4 hours to get there.
3 to 4 hours each way, and he made his way down. We got to Sirius. We did that demo. Man, I got to tell you, it was some of the best radio we ever did. And after that, I just, I can't thank Tom enough, because to this day, had we been able to keep that together for a variety of reasons, we didn't. I think you would be looking at the next bar stool coming from me, Tom, and the original crew. And it's one of my regrets to this day that I couldn't figure out a way. I'm a bad businessman. I couldn't figure out a way to maintain Tom and that original podcast crew, that original radio crew, because I think we had something special. It was a little bit of everything. It was mainly football. It was baseball, basketball, and, listen, Tom used to have like his Buffalo Betty story of the week. I hope I'm not killing your spot, Tom. Now that you're a married father of with a couple of kids playing center, But Tom used to come up with these stories. I'm not even going to say if they were real or fake, but they were entertaining. And that's my memory, that Tom, and nobody could stump this guy. No caller could ever stump Tom Casale. So that's my memories of Tom.
I can't take all the credit when guys are giving awful takes like fantasy football is ruining the sport. I mean, that's pretty talk about an all-time bad take. Huh?
Oh my God.
No, Tom, I agree. I agree. You know who else was like that? Was Don Banks's peer over at SI's Peter King. He hated fantasy. I remember at the combine overhearing him talk and put it down. And now what's he doing? He'll do his drafts, he'll take his sponsors. They're whores, they're money whores at the end of the day. And that's what irked me. It's like because when I used to talk about fantasy sports wherever I'd go, KFL was blessed. We kind of exploded. So I would talk here or there, and I would always sit there and say, our writers are better than any NFL reporter, because these NFL reporters are writing about feelings. They're writing about who they like, who they don't like. And that's their whole shtick. That's their whole angle. One reason they did not like fantasy analysts, because we didn't write about that. We wrote objectively and we would be right. See, I get all passionate. I'm like you with that aspect. And in regards to the podcast, you're right. When I was, it may have been right before I started KFL or got it going. That's when I discovered Gridiron Grumblings. And I was like, wow, look at this guy. This guy's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing this. And when I got together with Big John here like a year ago. Hey, let's work together. I had the sports grumbling stuff that I'd never done anything with that you gave me, yada, yada, yada. He's like, well, I'm doing this. I'm like, okay, you're an old man. Let's watch it flame out and burn. I say it jokingly, but I was really hoping to succeed. Really, I'll bide my time. So I finally worked with him or convinced him some months back, but it was because of his innovativeness, his creativity. And John's like this, like the Jolly Green Giant, this big old gentle monster, when you look at him, and I kind of gravitate to that. So, but you're right, a podcast before it was called a podcast, So yeah. It's not only memories with your former workers, but there are people scoping your site out, And what I told John is the difference between KFFL and sports grumblings is the luck factor. I don't care who is successful in life. There's always luck. I call it being at the right place at the right time. Yep. Others call it luck. And that's the difference between John and I, and why I wanted to work with him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Sometimes it's, that's what happened with sports betting with me. I mean, nobody knows sports betting like I do. And they legalized it. Guess what? All those media jobs that you couldn't get anymore, they opened up. There was a ton of jobs in media. And yeah, is it a little lucky? Is it being right? But it's, I'm not going to complain about it.
No, why should
it doesn't matter how you get there. Once you prove yourself is all that matters.
Right.
All right. Well, listen, Tom, I can't tell you how happy this show made me. I couldn't wait to do another show with you, even if it's for one time. I hope we can get you back on again as the season goes on. I hope we have time for us, is what I'm saying.
But he's not exaggerating, Tom. He was like a 12-year-old kid with his first Playboy.
Yeah, people don't understand. Like when Tom started with us, it's tough for me to think of him as a father and a husband right now. You don't understand how much I'm struggling with the concept, because it's nailing my own mortality, right? Like, oh man, if Tom Casale is married and he's a responsible father, Jesus, I'm about 1 foot in the grave already, And when he came up, I remember sometimes he'd send me an article and I'd be, Tom, you can't say that in print, you know, and I'd send it back to him and he'd be like, you're trying to censor me, you know, and I was like, oh man, but his talent was something that I couldn't even hope to reproduce. Like, and I'm not just blowing smoke his way. I'm telling you that he is one of the most entertaining writers that I've ever read. I would actually look forward to when I had to edit his column for two reasons. The only thing I had to do was correct spelling at best, right? Like everything else.
I can't spell.
Yeah, but like most good writers, none of us can spell. But he had this innate sense of what was inherently funny, in my opinion, but also insightful. To be able to like great stand-ups make you laugh, and then when you're done laughing, you're like, wait a second. Oh, wow, that was really insightful what he or she said. And Tom has that ability. And if you, by the way, one of the best Twitter follows on Twitter is Tom Casale. If you love sports betting, Tom, one of your greatest lines, because we were talking about him the past episode, tell him what you said about Jeff Fisher.
That I can't bet against him in New York.
He said Jeff Fisher is finally back in football. And
New York doesn't have USFL lines for some reason. And here I am waiting to bet against Jeff Fisher. God gave us another shot at this, right. And I couldn't bet it. And of course, he ran the ball 46 times up the middle, scored 12 points and lost. So I'm already lost some money not being able to bet against Jeff Fisher.
Right. So,
well, you know, John, or Tom, what's funny is I've caught John doing this a couple of times, you know, where he says he had to censor you. You're like, don't censor me. I'm like, dude, you can't say that to John all the time, you know, talking about censorship.
John was right, though. One of the things I learned over the years is how to say things. So, you know what I'm saying? Like back then I was young. I was in my early 20s and I just wanted to say it. Sometimes you can't say it that way. You got to, and like John made a good point about making people think after the laugh. I mean, I always think back to the guy I loved growing up, George Carlin. George Carlin made you laugh. I still go back and think about things he said that are true today. Like I remember when George Carlin was saying that in 1980. So It's stuff like that. You want people to take you seriously, and actually you want them to make them think, and not just you don't want people. Someone along my journey, John, gave me great advice. You want people laughing with you. You don't want people laughing at you. And that was advice I always took for the next 20, 25 years.
That's excellent. Hey, Tom, give us your Twitter handle.
It's at the Tom Casale.
That's simple enough. At the Tom Casale, and we'll make sure it's plastered all over the show screen. But Tom, listen, I love having you on. I can't emphasize that enough. And honestly, thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll join us again. So buddy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I loved it.
All right.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. So there goes Tom Casale, international bon vivant, William.
Well, you know, it's good to have somebody come on and actually elevate our show.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of the nonsense that we usually do. So
what I liked about him is there's so many fans out there who think they know everything. To have somebody come in who can casually and knowingly just rattle off all this. It's not a given, and too many people assume they have that gift, and I'm like, no, you don't. Myself included at times when I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh, no, you don't. You know, it's like, no, you're not good enough to be a gigolo, Dale. Get over it.
Yeah, you're not good enough to be in those porn films. You got to have a name like.
But I was in the Navy, and I had my practice runs.
Sailor Bill or something, you know. So listen, like I said, people think I may be doing this, but I love having my old crew on now. Guys that came up with Gridiron Group, like we said, Tim McCullough, Dennis Velasco, Tom Casale. These guys were guys where, William, you know, this is a small businessman. It becomes family. Yes, it's a business, but it's also a family when you start out in the garage, right? When you start out in a small, renting a small space with 10 desks in 200 square feet, you know, that type of thing.
Exactly.
So I'm always proud of these guys to see what they've accomplished in life. I always root for them. I try to follow them as best I can in their endeavors. And like I said, Tom's always been one of my favorites because I think he has the same type of sense of humor that I do. He has that sensibility. So It was really great to see him.
Should we say good night?
Good night, John.
Good night, William.
Peace out, America.